This is a meeting of the Sam and Esther Dolgoff Institute. Today we are meeting with John Clark. Go ahead, John. I'll give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. That was quick. I brought some show and tell as a kind of background. Back in the 70s, I met Sam and Esther in Des Moines, Iowa at an anarchist conference. They were the guests of honor. And there were a lot of young people there and who were really in awe of them because of their long history of involvement and the vast experience that they had. And I really enjoyed meeting them. I never saw them in person again. I talked to Sam on the phone. I went to France in 1979 to 80. I had a year off to do things right, do research and so forth. I went with my family. I called up Sam on the way. I think I was in New York. I was on the way to Montpellier. And he said he knew a wonderful young couple in Montpellier. The guy's name was Ronald Craig, who ended up being one of my best friends. So I met him through Sam, who highly recommended that we get in touch with Ronald and his wife, and they were so helpful to us. And he just died about a year or so ago, but we've been very close friends ever since. Back in the 70s, I got interested in the IWW. I kind of drifted away for a while and got into something else, but then I drifted back, and I've been paying dues for quite a few years. But I don't know if any of you know either of these people, but there were two guys named Gilbert Mers and Fred Hansen in the IWW, and they were Fred was a retired merchant seaman, and Gilbert was a retired dock worker. He was an IWW dock worker. He was from Bisbee, Arizona. He remembered seeing the IWW people rounded up and taken out into the desert in boxcars in the labor conflict in Arizona. And he was always intrigued by these people. He was wondering what did they do to make these authorities and rich people so mad at them. And he found out they were in the IWW, and that's how he joined. And Gilbert and Fred came to New Orleans many times. They had to have medical checkups at the Veterans Hospital, and they always visited. And Gilbert gave me a copy of a wonderful book he did called Working the Waterfront. He did a beautiful inscription on the inside cover. So I kept in touch a bit with Sam, and I did keep in touch with the IWW people. I think it was in '77, after Franco died, the CNT was getting reorganized in Spain, well, in Catalonia actually, and an old guy named Agustin Succi did a tour of North America. He spoke. He did talks in Spanish in Mexico, in English in the United States, and in French in Quebec. And he was organizing to get support for the CNT. And we had an anarchist group at that time. And here's the poster for Succi's visit to New Orleans. It has that famous CNT poster. And he was wonderful. He was in his 90s, I think, at the time. And he was full of energy. So there's one more thing. A couple of years ago, I visited a friend in Paris who comes from a Spanish family. And we went down to this farmhouse that he has in Aragon, which I had never been to. I had been to Barcelona and found out about the revolutionary history there. But I had a chance to find out more about Aragon, which was really the center of the collectives in the Spanish Revolution. And my friend had a friend who had something like in between a junk store and an antique store. He had a lot of old stuff that he sold. And he gave me this. I don't know if you can see it, but the bottom is a labor note from the Spanish Revolution, 1 peseta that the CNT put out. This was the money in Aragon during the revolution. And this picture, he said he couldn't verify what it is, but he was pretty sure it was 2 revolutionaries from the Spanish Revolution. He gave me that picture too. And of course, I read Sam's book on the Cuban Revolution, and also his collection on the Spanish, the collective. What was it called? It's been so long since I read it. What's the exact title? The
anarchist collectives?
The anarchist collectives, yeah, on the Spanish Revolution. I just couldn't remember what it's called, the collectives in the Spanish Revolution. The anarchist collectives was the title, which of course increased my enthusiasm a lot. But we're not going to really talk about that today because I said I was going to talk about this book that PM Press published. And I hope that I can share my screen and I can show the pictures from it. It's called Anarchy and the Big Easy. Let me make sure I have the title right. Sometimes I get my own titles wrong too. A History of Revolt, Rebellion, and Resurgence. It's a history of radicalism and revolutionary movements in New Orleans, my hometown. And there's much more than people would expect.
I've allowed you to share your screen if you want to.
Good. Let me see if I can do that. I have. How do I get this picture to be big? Click it, I guess. Application windows.
Yeah, when you hit share, then it should give you an option.
Oh, share again. Okay, that's what I wanted. Yeah. So I think this will be. Yeah, I think you can see it now.
Yeah.
Let me see if I have the bottom. Yeah, that's enough. I did the book. I write under 2 names. I write boring things under the name John Clark, and I write more interesting things under the name Max Cafard. And this is a Max Cafard book. I did it with a friend named Mike, who goes under the name Volpes as a cartoon artist. And he did a wonderful job. He works on a farm in Mississippi and comes into the city often. And so it was very hard for him to take out the time to do all the illustrations for this book. He put a lot of work into it. He took all his spare time doing it. And I think he did a wonderful job. So I'm going to try to zip through this book, and I'm going to, it's about the beginning of New Orleans. It's about the indigenous society, the invasion of the Europeans. But on pages 31 through 43, I guess, are really about labor history. And I thought I would focus on that because the IWW is part of it. Also, the First International is part of it. But I'd like to at least go through the rest of this book quickly and maybe slow down when we get to the radical labor history of New Orleans, which is quite amazing. So this is the beginning. The city has many names. It's been called the Crescent City, the Queen City of the South, the city. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. The city that Care forgot, and the Big Easy, which is the most recent name. It really, I think, was inspired by New York's nickname. But in the title, I call it the Big Easy. But I really, just what does that mean? I'm going to come back to that. Let me just show you a bit about this history. New Orleans is built in a delta bioregion, and it's really the product of the great river that we're on. We're a very recent place. The land has only been here for 4,500 years, and much of it has been here for much less than that. But our land has been created by this great river running to the sea. That's been called many things. The indigenous people called it the father of waters, the mother of waters, say the parent of waters. It was called the Meshasebe. That's what the French called it. That's what they thought the indigenous people were saying. The English-speaking people thought they were saying Mississippi. But with its 3 million acres, it became one of the largest and most biotically productive river deltas on this planet. So we are a product of the river. Our land that we walk on is a product of the river. I call it the anarchic force of nature. Nobody passed any laws that this should be done. It did it all on its own. And that's where we came from. So I don't know, does anybody speak French? I've never heard a French translation of the Big Easy. So I did my own translation, which is La Grande Indulgente. And I've asked some French people if they liked it, which they said they have. I hope it's a good translation. Whoops, where did it go? There it is. So this is the title, Anarchy in the Big Easy. There's a town called Paradis or Paradise, which is 25 miles from the city. But we kind of feel that this is paradise. The land that was created by nature is like a paradise. It's a paradise of swamps and marshes and wetlands. I grew up going fishing in the marshes and swamps and lakes of South Louisiana with my grandfather and my father. This history of people being here goes back 3,500 years when the native people started moving in. It was an amazing culture. They created large towns. The so-called Grand Village of the Natchez had 5,000 inhabitants. New Orleans, the city of New Orleans, which was founded in 1718, did not have that many people until after it became part of the United States in the early 19th century. There's a great ceremonial mound at Poverty Point, which was constructed in 3 months by 3,000 workers in a community of 9,000 people. I don't want to say too much about this, but the indigenous history is very important. It's a big inspiration of radicalism in New Orleans. This is the name of some of the tribes that were here. The place that was New Orleans was really a meeting place of many tribes. It was called Bulbancha, and it was a place that people came together to trade. Well, the downfall, I should say, for a long period of time, this 3,500 years, the indigenous people lived together in a very cooperative society without any state, without any system of domination. It was not until the 18th century when European imperialism came in and established the state and established economic exploitation. Ironically, the guy who developed Louisiana was a Scotsman named John Law, which is almost like a made-up name, but his real name was John Law. And he represented the French crown and brought slavery, for instance. There's a picture of slaves being paraded off the boat. My first ancestor in Louisiana was a forçat, which was a forced laborer. He was a prisoner in France who was sent to Louisiana to probably die because it was a place of yellow fever, malaria, typhoid, and all kinds of other diseases. So one thing is, if your family's been here for 300 years, you're probably pretty tough. Already by 1750, as this quote points out, which I won't quote, but already genocide was being carried out. Most of the native population was wiped out. But as soon as empire moved in, resistance began. Enslaved people fled to maroon communities. Forced laborers skipped town. Revolt and rebellion began. A lot of the pictures here are about conspiracy. You see conspiracies of these. This is leading up to the largest slave rebellion in North American history. Took place on what's called the German coast up the river from New Orleans, Côte des Allemands. It's where a lot of Germans lived. They came and then they spoke French after they came here. And it was an amazing revolt. It was on the east bank of the Mississippi on January 8th, 1811. An army of liberation with 500 troops rose up and basically wreaked havoc for a while until they were put down by police and military from the city. They had the goal of creating a free republic of Black people. And you can get the book and find out the history, but I'm just going to summarize this very quickly. It was put down very brutally. 95 slaves were killed. They put the heads of the slaughtered rebels on pikes along the river. Keep losing this, sorry. Okay, we're going to zip through this. It's a great story. One of the enslaved people who was a leader of the Maroons was named Jean Saint-Malo, who established a famous Maroon community on Lake Bourne, which is lakes north of the city. It really dominated trade around the city. Ultimately, he was framed. He was framed for murder, and he was hanged in front of the St. Louis Cathedral in the center of the city. Another Maroon community was named Saint-Malo, named after the Maroon leader. It was a community of Filipinos who deserted Spanish ships. And for 150 years, this community lived out in the marshes and swamps with no police, no taxes, no laws. They had a completely free cooperative community. This is another thing I'd like to talk about a lot, but in the 1850s, a famous anarchist revolutionary and the greatest historian of his age, Élisée Reclus, came to Louisiana, spent a couple, keep trying to scroll down and I close it. He wrote a book, he wrote a text called Voyage to New Orleans, which I co-translated. And I'm not going to say a lot about him, but he wrote a wonderful essay called Slavery in the United States, which I partly translated. I really should finish it. It's an amazing essay. He tells his story. He was a tutor on a plantation. He couldn't stand living there anymore and left the country, went back to France. But he tells this amazing story, which you can read it if you get the book, or I can talk about it later if you're interested. But he tells this wonderful story about a slave preacher preaching on a weekend to the slaves with the planters' families sitting on the verandas, really laughing at them. But he was telling an amazing story, and it's just a beautiful story. Also, another famous anarchist theorist, Joseph Desjacques. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a very important figure. He lived in Louisiana for a few years, and he wrote his most famous work, The Humanisphère, which is a utopian anarchist kind of just an amazing work. It's like a rant. It is not a literary work. It is an infernal work, the cry of the rebellious slave. And it's really an amazing book, which I highly recommend. He also did something else when he was in Louisiana. He wrote an open letter to Pierre Proudhon, who was a famous French philosopher who was really considered the first great anarchist philosopher in history. And Desjacques wrote this letter denouncing Proudhon because Proudhon was a misogynist. He excluded women from the free society he wanted to create. He was also an individualist, and he thought that you could trace the product of people's labor to the individual. And he said that's impossible. Labor is a communal product. You can't say how much anybody contributed to it. So he did something very important. He said to Proudhon, because of these things, you are not a true libertaire, which is the word, we get the word libertarian. It's French for libertarian. So the word libertarian was coined in political discourse in New Orleans by a communist anarchist. So other people have used it for other purposes, but that's the origin of the word. We shouldn't really give it up, by the way. In 1853, a German immigrant, Baron Ludwig von Reitzenstein, wrote one of the most amazing anarchistic novels in history, Mysteries of New Orleans. And I really can't go into it, but it's one of the most amazing books I've ever read. It's really a critique of all of the authoritarian institutions, the authoritarian religion, the authoritarian state, capitalism, racism, slavery. It's just an incredible book. He wrote it in German. It was serialized in a local German newspaper at the time, and it's now in English, and it's a wonderful book. And here's where the part on labor starts. I really love this illustration, which is a famous illustration from labor history from the First International, which my friend Volpes did a nice job with. The First International, if I could editorialize a little, I've done a lot of work on the 19th century, studying Desjacques and Reclus, the First International, the Paris Commune, and many other things. And they had some things that we do not have. And one was they had the International. As it says on this post, it was the first organization in history that tried to unite all human beings, regardless of nationality, race, sex, or religion. And it became something very important in the social imagination, that people had this idea that we could unite all of humanity. You know, now nationalism is becoming so powerful again, but we really don't have this kind of appeal to people that has this hold on the imagination, but it did in the 19th century. People really believed that they could create a union that would unite all human beings together as producers of everything on this planet that has been created by human ingenuity. And they had two other things. They had really three concepts that were very important. The second was the commune, which was inspired by the Paris Commune. And they really thought that everybody could do what was done in Paris, that just as the Parisians took over the city and ran it as a communal organization for at least 7 weeks or so, that everybody could do. In Lyon, there was a Commune of Lyon, and other places there were attempts to create the commune. But even though they didn't succeed at the time, they kept this goal of having everybody creating a commune. And the third concept they called the universal republic, which would be the unity of all human beings, not only as a local citizen, not only as a worker, but as a human being. And this is something we really lack now. This is not part of our everyday thinking and organizing. But you can see the result of this, that in a place like New Orleans, which has hardly any labor history, certainly in the 21st century, in much of the latter 20th century, it was a center of labor radicalism. There was a general strike in 1892, which is as a milestone in American labor history. 3,000 workers went on strike for a 10-hour workday, overtime pay, and a closed shop. and for democratic determination at the workplace. On November 8th, over 25,000 workers joined together to close down the city's economy. There's a quote from Samuel Gompers, who was not a good guy in labor history. He was really the enemy of these people because they thought he was such a sellout. But he said, there are no newspapers, no gas or electric lights, no wagons, no carpenters, painters, or in fact, any business going on. It is a strike that will go down in history. I've never heard a single person in New Orleans refer to it. That's how we've lost history. But anyway, it was put down, but it was a major step in labor organization here. In 1902, 2,000 streetcar workers shut down the city for 15 days. At one point, a crowd of 5,000 blocked the strike breakers. One thing you see in this labor history here in New Orleans is that the community was totally on the side of the workers and got in the way of any efforts to end the strike. When the shipping industry bosses in 1907 raised the number of bales of cotton moved by 25%, the crewmen struck. They were joined by the longshoremen, teamsters, and freight handlers from two railway lines. And I think it's really funny. The bosses sent in 1,300 scabs who were housed in floating scab hotels in the middle of the Mississippi River. They were afraid to live in the city at that time. They were protected by 200 armed guards. So it ended in a compromise, but one thing that came out of this is that many of the workers got fed up with reformist unionism and joined the revolutionary syndicalist IWW. And we have some IWW posters there. The one thing that the IWW hung on for quite a while with the dock workers union in New Orleans. And this was a very violent strike. 3 workers were shot in the back, 1 died, 43 were arrested. By the way, there was an IWW newspaper started in Alexandria, Louisiana. Right now, Alexandria, Louisiana, central and West Louisiana was where the largest, one of the largest intentional communities in U.S. history, New Llano, existed for over 20 years. It was a socialist commune with over 800 people. They had a hotel, workshops, a railroad terminal, couple of thousand acres of timberland, sawmill, all kinds of other things. What I think people have to realize, this was a center of really left-wing populist radicalism. It was central western Louisiana. Alexandria is in central Louisiana. Alexandria was a center of the IWW timber workers. It had a socialist mayor. I've looked at the statistics. We don't have counties, and the parishes in that part of Louisiana voted 85% for Trump in the last election. Okay, this is a place where they were revolutionaries at the beginning of the 19th century. I think people who have been revolutionary and radical have failed monumentally in communicating with ordinary people, that people are voting against their own interest. They're voting, of course, in a very defensive, paranoid way. But anyway, get back to this story. So the operator, the phone operator, of course, was on the side of the workers. She says they're bringing in scabs. She was overhearing their conversations. And one of the most violent strikes in U.S. labor history was the streetcar strike in 1929. And Mike did some nice pictures of that, which I'm going to skip through, except maybe this one of a burning streetcar. And they shut down the system for 2 weeks. The irate citizens met the few streetcars that ran with harassment and brickbats. And the big part of history that's remained from that strike is I don't know if anybody's heard of this. There's a famous sandwich called the po' boy in New Orleans. It's a sandwich on French bread, and it was invented during this strike. The people in the city made these sandwiches. Sometimes if they didn't have any money, they just put like French fries on them because they didn't have any shrimp or other things that are typical. But that po' boy sandwich, which is very famous in U.S. history, was invented as part of the streetcar strike of 1929. Well, that's the last main part about labor history. The next part is about the famous red light district Storyville, which was very culturally radical. I hope you can read this eventually. Jelly Roll Morton is a famous musician who, have you heard of Jelly Roll Morton?
Yep.
I hope so. He's a very important musician. He seen by some as the originator of jazz, was said to have a penchant for anarchy. But there was a self-proclaimed anarchist activist, Antonio Maggio, who was an early jazz and blues composer, who wrote the first published blues song, was a professed anarchist. In an interview with the local newspaper, the Picayune, I think this is interesting, I'm going to quote it. He said, "I believe that the people are the master. Anarchy is the doctrine of equality and love. Anarchy stands for the right to live under the same conditions that my fellow men live. I am against all government because government stands for the rich against the poor." He's really forgotten, but he's an important history person in music history. A lot of this is on People's Carnival. You can probably find this somewhere. I did an interview many years ago with a friend of mine. We interviewed Big Chief Donald Harrison of the Guardians of the Flame Mardi Gras crew, or Mardi Gras gang, they call it. The Mardi Gras Indians are a very important part of New Orleans Black culture. A lot of the escaped slaves found refuge with the Native Americans and, in fact, lived in maroon communities with the Native Americans or nearby. And in part because of that, for at least a century, there have been these groups, the Mardi Gras Indians, that have paraded in costumes inspired by, as I found out, the Plains Indians costumes are very well known, but it's only half of them that are inspired by that. A lot of them are inspired by Central American Indians, the Maya, the Aztec, and so forth. But Mr. Harrison was an amazing person. I got to interview him and then meet him a number of other times and talk to him. And he really was an organizer in the Black community. He was trying to get the young Black kids to sew costumes, to put their efforts into these beautiful costumes. They kind of sublimated their anger. He said in the old days, there was a lot of violence associated with the Mardi Gras Indians, but it's become ritualized. They confront each other on the street and they have these verbal challenges. It's really amazing and it's beautiful. We're getting near the end. The next thing is the Black Panther Party. In 1970, they came to New Orleans. And I'm very happy to say that a very good friend of mine was one of the main organizers of the Black Panther Party. He's going to come back because he was also the inspiration for a group called Common Ground Collective, which was the largest recovery group in this area after Hurricane Katrina, and was really one of the largest anarchist-based organizations in modern history in the United States. So you find a little bit about the values of the Black Panthers. Here's a picture of Malik talking about how he was inspired when he was young by the Panthers. He got involved for the uplift of the community. And they were organized in the Desire Project, which no longer exists. But the Panthers had a headquarters there. Within 2 months, we turned it. It was one of the most dangerous communities. It was turned into the safest community, established a breakfast program, feeding between 200 to 400 kids a day. They established drug-free zones and sickle cell awareness. So they were very active, and this is one thing you learn from a lot of movements. Movements are successful when they don't go to the people with an ideology. They go to the people with what people need. This is what you find in the Palestinian movement in Lebanon. You find Hezbollah, for instance, has been a social service organization and also a radical organization, and that's one reason why it's survived. And the Panthers were very successful for a while because they had educational programs, health programs, drug programs, all kinds of programs that people really needed because their community was being persecuted and oppressed and destroyed by the authorities and by the people who wanted to sell them things that they didn't need. So at one point they had agents, they found out what was going on, and they attacked the Panther headquarters. I'm going to go through this quickly, but it culminated somewhere where the number of rounds they shot into the headquarters. It was thousands of rounds. I shouldn't pass that up. Somewhere in here. A small attacking army opened fire on the Panthers' office. The police shot half an hour, and then all of a sudden, maybe we didn't put in the number, but it was an enormous number of rounds shot into their headquarters. It says I crawled through each room to ask how many injured, how many. Anyway, what happened was they didn't kill anybody. Somebody told them that the police were coming. They all put things in front of themselves, and they all survived. So after that, 5,000 residents formed a line in front of the headquarters and stopped the police from doing anything else. So there's a big story here. They were put on death row. It was a big struggle. This is the next part of the story. I'm just going to brush over. It's about noted filmmaker Helen Hill and physician musician Paul Gilliunas. They're wonderful people. He wrote a lot of radical folk songs. She was an animator and taught film in the community. She unfortunately was killed by someone who invaded their home and an insane person, really. The next part is what happened after Malik inspired Common Ground. After Hurricane Katrina, there was an attempt to re-engineer the city. The new urbanists moved in. They wanted to create runoff areas. They wanted to create boutiques and basically have a smaller, richer, completely tourist-oriented city. Well, Malik got together with a few people and started the Common Ground Collective. It had the slogan, solidarity, not charity. Everybody was feeling sorry for people in New Orleans. 80% of the city had been flooded. Like 1,600 people had been killed in the city, suburbs, and on the Gulf Coast. But what people really needed was helping themselves. This school in the 9th Ward neighborhood, St. Mary of the Angels, was turned over to Common Ground. It housed up to 500 volunteers. I'm going to read this because it's so impressive. Projects of Common Ground included house gutting, mold abatement, roof tarping, tree removal, temporary housing, safety and health training, a community newspaper, community radio, bioremediation, a biodiesel project, computer classes, childcare co-ops, worker co-ops, legal assistance, eviction defense, prisoner support, after-school and summer programs, anti-racism training, wetlands restoration. some of which still exist. But there were also problems with it, which I could talk for an hour about that. There were a lot of attitudes that had to be changed. There was an infiltrator, a government agent who ended up as the site coordinator at that school that I mentioned. But what is clear is an enormous amount was achieved. In fact, communities were saved. They went in and cleaned out houses, did mold rebatement. They made the places livable again, and people could go back to their neighborhood when the plan was to get rid of them, to get them out of the city permanently. The next part is I worked with a group on Desire Street. My friend Leanie Halbert opened up her home to a small group. And I won't go into the details, but it was the most profoundly moving and influential few weeks really in my life. I worked on this for many months, but I worked with that group for a short period of time. But getting involved, living with people 24 hours a day, putting all of our efforts into helping the community really taught me what our life should be about. We should all live in communities which are devoted 24 hours a day to the community and nothing else. And if we live in that kind of community, we could change the world. There was another group called the Soul Patrol in the 7th Ward, which our community broke up. We were hit by another hurricane named Hurricane Rita, and a lot of the volunteers had to leave. So I decided to work with what I thought was the best grassroots neighborhood community, which was inspired by this woman, Mama D is her name, who was an extraordinary community leader. And I could talk for hours about that, but I learned so much from Mama D and the people in the 7th Ward. We end up with People's Carnival. A lot of young people have gotten involved in sort of radical marching groups. There's a group that I used to be with called the Church of the Great Green Frog, which was kind of mock cult that marched on Mardi Gras Day. I wish I could give you all a, I don't know if you can, this is a get out of purgatory free card. We used to give those out to everybody we met on the street during Mardi Gras. But anyway, it's a lot of fun, and it's also very political. And if you ever read this, you'll see how it's expressed politically. This was on the raiding of the Iron Rail anarchist bookstore, which was closed down by the police the day after Mardi Gras in reaction to these things that I've been talking about. People's Carnival still exists. There's still the Eris Radical Marching Parade. There are other similar there's one called the Crew of Trash, which makes all their costumes out of trash they find on the street, and they throw trash to people instead of the junk plastic beads and things that other people throw. And they're kind of one of the more radical crews. They have a what do you call it? I'm forgetting. They used them in the Middle Ages, a catapult. Like they used to throw things across the castle walls. They throw trash into the rich people's balconies. Anyway, we're going to skip past that. I know I've run over time. There is another thing related to this. This is something young people were very much involved in. There was something called the White Supremacy Monument, which existed since the end of the 19th century. And there was a movement to take down this monument, which was successful. It was kind of a predecessor of the anti-movement monuments, which took over, and all the Confederate monuments are now taken down here and virtually everywhere. This was an anti-Trump demonstration that was through the Central Business District. And it's very interesting, but maybe not a world historical event. So it ends up with today in New Orleans, most anarchist projects are grounded in a practice of critical revolutionary mutual aid. By the way, this Common Ground collective has inspired a lot of other mutual aid activities, like the mutual aid relief group that exists in many places. A lot of what happened in Hurricane Sandy, I think, was inspired by people who had experience with Common Ground. So there are groups like the New Orleans Mutual Aid Group, the Indigenous Group, the Bobancha Collective, the Food Autonomy Network, Lobelia Commons, to more spontaneous forms of mutual aid that flourish in the aftermath of hurricanes, tornadoes, and finally, recently, the COVID-19 epidemic. And this is what anarchy and the Big Easy means in practice.
I have a question for you, John. I really appreciated that the early in the 19th century focus on, mostly because I was unaware of that. You also listed a number of names, many French names, and not being well acquainted with the French language, I don't know how to spell them. And I was wondering if at another point in time, you might, for us benefit, write up a list of some of those names and titles of books that you referenced, so that we could see if we could access them.
All right. I don't know. The main names I mentioned were Desjacques and Reclus, and I don't know who else. Von Reitzenstein, and not very few people have heard of him, but he wrote this amazing book, and I'll see if I can go through this and see what names would be important.
So it was one of the Reclus brothers who went to New Orleans?
Yeah, it was Élysée, the famous one.
Okay.
Élie was his brother, who was also well known. He was kind of a historian. He wrote, he had a nephew also that wrote a book on like geography, more like wonderful places in France, but that wasn't a great geography. Reclus wrote this new universal geography. He was the last person to try single-handedly, of course, with a lot of helpers, but really to put together a universal geography. It was 19 volumes, 16,000 pages, and it's beautifully illustrated. And it was translated into English very quickly. You can probably go to a good library and find an old copy of the New Universal Geography. He wrote another.
Can I get in here?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
No, it was one of the most successful. I don't know. You couldn't call it a textbook, but one of the most successful books on the earth sciences. They called him the French Darwin. That was one of the.
Yeah, I wanted to mention a few of his other books. He wrote a book called Humanity in the Earth, L'Homme et la Terre, which unfortunately has never, you can find it in Spanish, probably Italian, of course, French, but it's never been translated. I co-edited and I wrote a book. It's called Anarchy, Geography, Modernity. It's on Élysée Reclus. Half of it is translations from Reclus. And we co-translated, Camille Martin and I co-translated some of the chapters from this work, Humanity in the Earth, that are very important. The chapter on culture and property, the chapter on the modern state, and the chapter on progress. But it's a very important book. He also wrote a number of books for young people. One is called History of a Mountain. The other is called History of a Stream. And they've been translated to English. They were very popular as a book that was given like to the valedictorian of a high school, when they graduate. And they're beautiful writing. He wrote this book, he wrote a couple of articles called Voyage to New Orleans, which we co-translated. And I wrote a text about his life and work to go with it. And if any of you come to New Orleans, I'll give you a copy. I promise you. I have a lot of copies, but it costs too much to mail them to people, so I don't send them to everybody. But I'd be happy to give you a copy, or if anybody comes here, I'll give the person a couple of copies to take to other people. But it's a relatively short book. It's only about 100 pages with all the commentary. It's a beautiful book. So he did a lot, and he was also, he was active in the Paris Commune. He was very active in the anarchist movement. He was a collaborator with Bakunin. He was a member of Bakunin's Revolutionary Brotherhood and other groups. He was sent to 11 prisons after the Paris Commune. And ultimately, he was going to be sent to New Caledonia, which is what they did with a lot of people. That's a long way from France. You don't know where New Caledonia is. But they usually sent them to New Caledonia. But they sent him to Switzerland for some reason in exile. And in Switzerland, he ended up getting in touch with the Swiss watchmakers and Bakunin and the mutualists and revolutionary anarchist people. And it was really a big step in his revolutionary development. So the French state did him a favor. They made him remain in exile for quite a while. He later lived in Belgium and taught at something called the New University, which they set up as an alternative university. He had quite a life. He was an amazing person. Another thing I love about him, he was a very humble person. He was a genius. He was an amazing writer. And there's a letter, one of his letters, my friend Ronald Craig gave me bound copies of the letters of Reclus. It's been very helpful to me over the years that I've done research on Reclus. And there's this one letter in which a young woman wrote to him and said that she was so impressed by his work, she wanted to become his follower. And he wrote a letter back saying, I don't want any followers. I don't want anybody to be my follower. He really didn't. He said, do I call you my follower? Do I call myself your follower? And he was noted. I mean, I know a lot about this guy. I spent about 10 years studying his life and his work. And he would go to a union office or a political group's office, and he would fold newsletters and things like, he would do the work. I appreciate that because I've put out newsletters by myself. I know how important it is to have somebody. If you have something that's a very sort of rudimentary movement and you don't have a lot of people involved, it's so important that somebody does this lousy work, which can be fun if you have a few people sitting around together talking. So when I read that Reclus would fold newsletters and help get them out, I just thought that was so admirable of him.
Well, he was
they used to call it Jimmy Higgins' work.
Shelby, did you want to say something? You got you're muted.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You can hear me?
Yes.
Crazy. You were talking about the Panthers' activity in New Orleans. Did the New Orleans Panthers follow suit with the Panthers in New York and become Leninists?
Okay. Malik is a friend of mine. He was one of the top 2 or 3 people in the Panthers. I have never heard anything about Leninism. I've never heard the word Leninism. I mean, New Orleans, for one thing, there's not a big Marxist-Leninist background in New Orleans. I mean, the groups here have been a joke. Like in the 60s, I knew them very well because we were competing with them. We weren't much either.
I remember reading Panther newspapers back in the 60s when they started bringing in worshiping at the altar of Angela Davis and Marxism.
Elon Musk is doing something. Does anybody hear? There's a weird sound whenever you say something.
Got some kind of a feedback.
It sounds like a moon man talking.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we'll put up with it.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, I remember in the 60s, if you would read Panther newspapers, they were not only worshiping Angela Davis, but also Marxism, Leninism. And this was being, part of the preachment of the Black Panther Party in New York. I don't know
Right.
from New Orleans, never
No.
been there.
No, nothing like that.
Okay, good.
New Orleans is so provincial. I don't think anybody knew what Marxism was.
Well, how did they know what anarchism was? What brought that over?
Oh, well, we brought it to. No, they didn't know what anarchism was either. I mean, you mean in my time, in the 60s?
No,
People would have
historically,
known what
from the
anarchism was
beginning.
in New Orleans in the 60s. Now, people learned a lot slowly because one way that I found out
You missed
about
the
it was
question.
Leonard Crimmerman. I don't know if you ever heard of Leonard Crimmerman, but he was a philosophy professor. He came to the University of New Orleans, and he did a book called Patterns of Anarchy, which was there were, I think, three anarchist, and one was by Horowitz called The Anarchist, I think it was, and there was a third one a little later, but it was one of the first two anthologies. And I didn't know what anarchism was until I discovered it through him. The public really didn't know. I mean, there wasn't like a left-wing intelligentsia or a left-wing activist community that was Marxist-Leninist. There were groups. There were, the SWP was around. Progressive labor was around. I remember we had this group. Our group was called the Black Pearl Mutual Aid and Pleasure Club. That was the name of our anarchist group. And it was called Black Pearl because I lived in the Black Pearl neighborhood. I had this big old house that I got for practically nothing, but it had a lot of space in it. And we had a dining room table that we could extend and put 20 people around it. So every Sunday night, we had a meeting and a dinner. The dinner was the most successful part. The meeting was not so great. But anyway, we had a good group. And I remember the progressive labor people had some kind of, they had an International Women's Day event. And I remember we put out a whole pamphlet against them to give out at the door when people were going in. It was about how sexist they were and heterosexist and machistic. They had people dress up like they're fake working class people and all this stuff. And they were trying to control people's personal life. And they were very, very fake in every way. But it was so insane. Like, we put in all this work to put out this pamphlet to give out to like 20 people as they went into this meeting. That's what the left was like here. So most people didn't know what anarchism or Marxism, Leninism was. They knew that communists were in the Soviet Union and they were bad. Occasionally, some politician would say something about anarchists, like George Wallace. I remember in the 60s attacked anarchists. He didn't know what they were, but he attacked them.
Lewis, did you want to say something? Or
I asked that question about the French philosophers and Reclus. Thanks.
Yeah, I really recommend, if anybody's interested in reading about Reclus, I have this book that PM Press put out, which is half an explanation of his ideas and a little bit about his life and his ideas, and half of it is a translation from, like, his major political work is called Evolution, Revolution, and the Anarchist Ideal, and it's never been translated into English. So there's a big chunk translated from that in that book. Now, Desjacques' book, Humanosphere, has been translated, and you can find that in English. But he died very young. He was a visionary. I really recommend his book, The Humanosphere. Those are the two people I think I mentioned most who were French.
I have a question for you, John. Right now, we're in the middle of Trump mania, and I was wondering if you had any particular thoughts about that.
Yeah, I would recommend making fun of it, but taking it very seriously. I think he's an extremely dangerous person. I'm not going to predict what he's going to do. That's impossible. I'm not going to predict whether he's going to succeed or have a downfall. He takes a lot of chances. He could have a downfall, but there's something behind him bigger than him, which is not only in the United States. I mean, I have a lot of connections with France, and the what used to be the National Front and now is the Rassemblement National, the national. I don't know what they call it. Rassemblement is like a gathering. It's called a national something. And they're very big. Hungary has gone in that direction. Portugal has gone to the right. Spain has a big extreme right movement.
Italy.
One of the worst things is, the largest country in the world is India. And it basically has Hindutva is the Hindu nationalist ideology, and Modi is basically a fascist. China is really a kind of fascism also. It's a very organized, bureaucratic, more rational fascism. Indonesia, the fourth largest country in the world, has under Suharto was really fascist. And has always this fascistic tendency to it. So I think, global fascism did not definitively lose in the Second World War. It's very strong right now. And, Trump is part of that. And I can imagine him unleashing a very violent reaction here, particularly if he has trouble in the midterm elections, or whether he will even allow real midterm elections if he fears trouble. I mean, there's a possibility that they're going to be rigged pretty openly, and if he fears, he's either going to die or lose power, eventually, and who knows how crazy he's going to get then. I mean, I think we're looking at something like, the worst days of the Roman Empire in some ways. I think it's really real insanity. So I think we have to be prepared for that.
You think this is part of some sort of major economic crisis or whatever that we've been going through? We had Shane Burley at our last meeting.
Yeah, I came. I wanted to know a little bit more about the group. I had to go to one of my great-grandchildren's birthday parties, so I couldn't stay for the whole thing. But I did stay for about 45 minutes.
That perhaps there's some major problems with capitalism seems to be going through right now, and whether this is what sparked all this fascistic trend that's been going on around the world.
I think you have to look at the cultural dimension, the reactive dimension. I think obviously capitalism has a lot to do with it. And one thing people have to realize is that we are headed toward a global catastrophe, an ecological catastrophe, in which life is going to become increasingly difficult. I've spent some time in Bangladesh. I don't know what the current population is, 180 million people. It's basically a delta country. It's going to go underwater. I mean, we know it's going to go underwater. Where I live is going to go underwater. By early in the next century, the city is not going to exist. But we're going to have places where people can't live as they did before. It's going to be too hot. And, people are concentrated in very hot areas. Population concentration is in hot areas. It's going to be increasingly difficult. There are going to be more migrants. What's going to happen when 180 million people from Bangladesh are looking for somewhere to live? There are going to be unprecedented pressures on people. They're all, part of it is, okay, I guess I have to give you my prediction. Eco-fascism is my prediction. It's going to get so bad. I'm not going to say it is. Unless people start acting differently, there will be no organization for an alternative future. That the future that's programmed right now is for global ecological catastrophe, crisis and then catastrophe, increasing pressures in every way. And what is the alternative? When people do not have an alternative, they flock to authoritarian leaders. They flock to fundamentalist religions. People are going to be looking for delusions and authoritarian solutions. That is the predestined future, given the way the rules work now. So it's not just like we can tinker with capitalism and avoid this. We need, okay, I'll give you my theory of revolution. There have been 4 in the history of humanity. The first was the humanization revolution, in which the small bands and tribal groups overthrew the alpha males and established a cooperative community. That's where humans came from. That's where taking care of future generations came from. That's where a large brain came from. It came from, a family structure, the influence of grandmothers. We have anthropological evidence of all this. The second revolution was the agricultural revolution, which established, basically tribal society turning into what used to be called barbarism, the original states, hierarchical society, patriarchy, and so forth. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, which was also a technological revolution, which established the modern nation state and also established corporate capitalism, which is what we've been living through, and technology based on the steam engine, locomotive, other technologies. And then we had, we could really say there's been a 4th revolution, which is the digital cybernetic revolution, which is also a revolution that's affecting the human mind in a way that none of these others affected so quickly. So there's a change in all the institutions. We really have to be looking at how this digital revolution changed things and how conditioning is so different now. So the question is, will we have a 5th revolution? Right now, this last revolution is not only programmed for an extraordinary form of domination, but also it's programmed for global mass suicide, in which humanity kills off most of the species on the planet while destroying itself. So what we need is a turn in geohistory. We have to turn the direction of geohistory, which has only happened really after that first humanization 3 times. And it's never happened voluntarily by deliberation, by people deciding, I don't want to live in a tribe anymore. I want to live in a kingdom. Nobody said that. I want to live in an empire. I want to live under an imperial army. Nobody said that. They adapted to the conditions, and that's what we got. Then they adapted to more conditions, and we got industrial capitalism. Then they adapted to more condition, and never have they adapted so willingly. When I quit teaching at the university 10 years ago. When I go back, I'm horrified seeing all these young people carrying their phones. They're carrying a phone like it's part of their body. They'd rather lose part of their body than lose their phone. So never has the system of domination been so effective in taming people, domesticating people, making them willing victims in their own sacrifice. So we need an alternative to that. We need a change in geohistory. We're not organizing for that now. That's what we have to organize for. We have to do it very quickly. I don't think chances are we're going to do it, but I have to keep saying we need to do it because I hope people start doing it. That's why I mentioned those three things that people had in the 19th century: the international, the commune, and the universal republic, because they were things that inspired hundreds of millions of people who were ready to change their life and change everybody's life to create a different kind of world. And there's no energy on the left now. The energy is on the right.
Well, I think what's unfortunate is that this new system that you're talking about, or this new digital revolution or whatever, that if you look back at capitalism and how that came about, that it was weakest when it first started, and there was resistance to it. But then after time, the capitalists learned how they could better domesticate the working class, and so the resistance to it just isn't there anymore. And I suspect that's the same thing we're going through right now, as you're mentioning this this digital takeover or whatever.
Right.
It's weak now, and now we could fight it, but there isn't a really understanding of what we're facing.
Yeah, right. The problem is when people are being given what they want, it's very difficult to convince them to go in a different direction.
Do we have any more comments or questions that people would like to ask John? Shelby, you need to turn
your audio.
Turn your mic on.
There you go.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. I've got a split now.
Okay.
Yeah. And, charge up my phone. No.
Charge up your community.
Yes.
There you go.
I think.
Okay. Thank you very much.
One of the things,
Hey,
sorry you have to leave it. One of the things that Reclus said that I really love is he said, you have to form, this is what he called them in French, of course, small loving associations. And he called this the spirit of full association, that people have to want to cooperate. They have to want to work together. This is what I saw after Hurricane Katrina. It was the worst time of my life. One of my kids was missing. I didn't know where he was.
Wow.
Other people were scattered around the country. Nobody from my family was in the city. I went back and everybody's, 80% of the homes were flooded. My sister's home in the suburbs is near a bayou. That was flooded. They had just moved in just a few months before that. But in many ways, it was the happiest period of my life, particularly when I was living at my friend's house with a group of people, maybe 15 people, who came there to work together, to support each other, to spend all of their time helping the community, because everybody was so grateful. When somebody showed up at their house, they needed help, and somebody showed up for only one purpose, to help them. That's the kind of community we need to live in. People need help now. People are dying of despair, of loneliness, of alienation, of sickness, of many things. And they need help. In the 60s, people talked about love. Nobody talks about love now. It's a very powerful force. Love and justice, are what we need. And the problem with justice is people always think you're attacking them when you talk about justice. Martin Luther King said, justice is the other side of love. But we don't have many people talking that way anymore.
Well, Martin Luther King also felt that progress was inevitable. And
at least he talked
that
about
is not a sentiment that I can share at this point. I'm sorry.
Well, what is the arc of justice bends very slowly.
Yeah.
Bends on another planet eventually.
Listen, I got to split.
All right.
Thank you and take care.
Bye, Shelby.
John, can I get in here?
Please.
John, thank you very much. It's a wonderful talk.
Oh, I wasn't sure who was trying to talk.
No, yes, really, thank
Hold on
you.
a second, please, John.
What's happening?
I think we're going to wrap it up here. Yeah. John,
Okay, if I could just say one thing very briefly. I was so inspired by people working together after Hurricane Katrina. I truly believe that if people can be offered that kind of experience, they will be willing to change their life. And that's what we have to do. We have to offer someone the possibility of by the way, Gustav Landauer, another great anarchist theorist, said, he talked about positive envy. We have to create communities that are so good that everybody will want to be part of them. I have hope that if we start doing that, we'll get somewhere.